January 24th, 1945. Hausen, France. First Lieutenant Garland Connor is buried in a frozen 18-inch grave of a ditch, clutching a telephone with numb, blood-slicked hands. Through the blinding snow, the nightmare arrives. 6 Tiger tanks, 60-ton steel monsters grinding directly toward him. Behind them, 600 German infantrymen advance through a forest that's literally disintegrating under the artillery Connor is calling down. Shrapnel has already shredded his shoulder, but he's too focused to bleed. He is the invisible surgeon of the battlefield. Now the German commanders are standing in their turrets, eyes scanning the white wasteland, hunting the man killing their army. They are looking for him, and they are 50 yards away. It tells the algorithm to share this with more people who need to hear about true heroes. Subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from the United States. You're helping rescue these stories from being forgotten forever. His voice was steady despite everything, despite the cold, despite the blood, despite knowing what he was about to do. "Fire on my position," he said. The officer on the other end asked him to repeat. Connor did. The coordinates he gave would bring American artillery shells down 30 yards from where he lay, inside the killing radius, inside the zone where shrapnel turned men into memory. And in that moment, in that terrible clarity of someone who had survived 4 years of war and 7 wounds, Connor understood something the Germans advancing toward him had not yet realized. They weren't just fighting one American lieutenant in a shallow ditch. They were fighting an entire system of industrial warfare that could rain thunder on command, and no amount of courage or armor would save them from what was coming. The path that led Connor to that frozen ditch began long before January 1945 in the hills of Clinton County, Kentucky, where tobacco grew in rocky soil, and the nearest school sat 15 miles from his family's farm. He was 5'6" and weighed 120 pounds. Built lean from years of manual labor, hands calloused from mule harness and plow handle. He never finished high school. There was no time for it. Farms didn't run themselves, and his family needed him in the fields more than they needed him conjugating verbs or solving for X. When he enlisted in March 1941, 9 months before Pearl Harbor, he did it the way thousands of rural Americans did, quietly, without fanfare, because the alternative was watching the world burn while he stayed home growing tobacco. By January 1945, Connor had participated in 10 major campaigns and 4 amphibious assault landings across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. He had been wounded 7 times, each injury significant enough to warrant evacuation, each time returning to his unit after treatment, because that's what you did. His most recent wound had sent him to a field hospital 3 weeks earlier. He returned to 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, just 2 days before the Germans launched their counterattack. A role that typically kept men behind the front lines working with maps and prisoner interrogations and patrol reports. Intelligence officers analyzed information. They did not land assaults or call fire from exposed positions, or voluntarily run through artillery barrages. But Connor had already earned 4 Silver Stars for direct combat action, each one representing a moment when he chose to move forward into danger instead of staying safe behind the lines. His battalion knew him. The Colmar Pocket represented the last German-held territory in France, 850 square miles of frozen forest and farm fields west of the Rhine River. The Germans had fortified it since November 1944, pouring resources into a defensive position they could not afford to lose, but could not realistically hold. Every Allied attempt to eliminate the pocket had failed with brutal casualties. Then came Operation Nordwind on New Year's Day, 1945, Hitler's final major offensive in the West, a desperate attempt to break American lines in Alsace while the Battle of the Bulge still raged 300 miles north. The Germans lacked fuel, lacked reserves, lacked everything except determination and experienced soldiers who knew the end was coming but fought anyway. Endurance beyond reasonable limits. Temperatures averaged 10 degrees below zero. No moonlight for weeks. Snow covered everything, turned the landscape into a monochrome nightmare where distinguishing enemy from terrain required constant vigilance. Soldiers slept in frozen foxholes when exhaustion overwhelmed cold, which wasn't often. German patrols probed American positions every night, professional reconnaissance teams looking for weak points to exploit. The battalion had lost 43 men in 2 weeks, most artillery and sniper fire, the kind of attrition that ground units down without the drama of pitched battles. You just bled men day by day until the unit stopped functioning. At 7:15 on the morning of January 24th, German artillery opened fire with an intensity that signaled something more than routine harassment. Shells walked across 3rd Battalion's forward positions with methodical precision, destroying observation posts, cutting communication wires, suppressing defensive positions. The barrage lasted 12 minutes. Then silence. Then the sound every infantryman learned to dread: tank engines. A runner burst into the battalion command post with information that changed everything. 6 Tiger tanks advancing. 600 infantry moving through woods toward the battalion's left flank. If those Tigers reached American foxholes, they would roll through defensive positions like a scythe through wheat. 3rd Battalion would be overrun, destroyed, scattered, and the entire 7th Army front could collapse. The only weapon that could stop 6 Tigers was artillery, but artillery needed eyes. Someone had to see the German advance, had to adjust fire in real time, had to stay alive long enough to walk shells onto target. The forward observation post had been destroyed in the opening barrage. The observers were dead or wounded. No one could see the attack from the command post. Trees blocked the view. Connor studied the map and understood the geometry immediately. To observe the German assault, someone would need to cross 400 yards of open ground under active artillery fire, establish a position ahead of American lines, and remain there while 6 60-ton tanks and 600 experienced German infantry advanced directly toward them. Connor picked up a telephone handset and 400 yards of communications wire. He looked at the battalion commander. Then he walked out of the command post into the snow without saying a word, because words wouldn't change what needed to be done, and talking about it would only waste time he didn't have. The German artillery had paused, but Connor knew it would resume. They always fired preparation barrages before tank attacks, waited for infantry to close distance, then opened up again to pin defenders while armor broke through. He ran, 400 yards across open ground, telephone wire unspooling behind him, boots breaking through snow crust with each step. At 100 yards, German guns found him. Shells landed 40 yards left, then 30 yards right. German forward observers had spotted a lone American soldier running toward their attack and were adjusting fire to kill him. A shell destroyed a tree 70 yards ahead. The trunk exploded into splinters that rained down like wooden daggers. Connor kept running. Another shell landed 20 yards behind him. The concussion wave hit like being punched by something invisible and enormous. He stumbled but didn't fall. The wire kept unspooling. At 250 yards, a shell obliterated a tree directly in his path. The trunk split vertically. Half crashed across the snow. Connor vaulted it without breaking stride, his body moving on autopilot, while his brain calculated angles and distances and probabilities of survival. That kept decreasing with every step. Shrapnel tore through branches overhead. Pieces of hot metal hissed in the snow around him. Another shell, closer now, 15 yards to his left. Frozen earth geysered upward. Chunks of dirt rained down. The blast wave hammered his eardrums until he couldn't hear his own breathing anymore, just high-pitched ringing that would last for days. He reached the American front line at 300 yards. Soldiers stared from foxholes at an intelligence officer running toward the enemy with a telephone. He didn't stop to explain. 30 yards beyond the foxholes, Connor found what he needed, a shallow ditch, maybe 18 inches deep. Not deep enough to stop bullets. Not deep enough to protect against artillery, but deep enough to give him a sight line toward the German advance while keeping his silhouette below snow level. He dropped into the ditch. The telephone wire had held. He cranked the handset. A voice answered. The artillery fire direction center 3 miles behind the front line. 12 American 105 mm howitzers. Enough firepower to shatter a German attack if the shells landed in the right places. Connor became the eyes of 3rd Battalion's artillery. Everything depended on what he could see and whether he could stay alive long enough to direct the guns. He raised his head above the ditch rim. The German infantry were 200 yards away, moving through trees in disciplined squad formations. They advanced in short rushes, one element moving while another provided covering fire, professional soldiers who knew their craft. Behind them came the Tigers, 4 visible now, massive shapes pushing through smaller trees like they were matchsticks. The tanks stayed in the tree line for cover, but they were coming, slow and methodical and unstoppable. Connor lifted the handset and gave coordinates. The first shells arrived 40 seconds later, landing 150 yards behind the German infantry. Too far, he adjusted. The second salvo landed in the middle of the German formation. The forest erupted. Trees disintegrated. Shrapnel screamed through air in every direction. The 105 shells carried 14 pounds of high explosive each. 12 shells, 168 pounds of explosive detonating simultaneously among 600 men packed into attack formations. German soldiers disappeared. Others went down. The advance stopped. Connor called for repeat fire, same coordinates. The American guns were firing for effect now. Maximum rate of fire, 48 shells every 60 seconds hammering the same 200 square yards of forest. The German infantry scattered, squad formations breaking apart, soldiers running for whatever cover they could find. The forest had become a killing ground. But the Tigers were still coming. Artillery couldn't stop them. The 105 shells could damage tracks or optics, but couldn't penetrate armor. The tanks advanced in wedge formation, 2 in front, 2 behind them, 2 bringing up the rear. Tank commanders stood in turrets, scanning for targets. 1 Tiger fired. The 88mm gun cracked like thunder. The shell hit an American foxhole 300 yards away. Dirt and snow exploded upward. The soldiers in that foxhole were dead. Another Tiger fired. Another foxhole obliterated. The tanks were 300 yards from the American line. In 4 minutes they would reach defensive positions, and once Tigers crossed into the rear of American lines, 3rd Battalion would collapse. Connor shifted his fire mission to the tanks. The problem was precision, artillery-saturated areas. It killed infantry in the open. It destroyed buildings. But tanks were small targets, fast targets, armored targets. Shells started falling around the Tigers. One landed 10 yards in front of the lead tank. The Tiger drove through the blast without slowing. Another shell hit behind the formation. The tanks kept coming. Their commanders knew American 105s couldn't stop them. Connor needed the shells closer, much closer. The next salvo landed among the Tigers. A shell hit the lead tank's right track. The track broke. The Tiger slewed hard right and stopped. Immobilized but still dangerous. Turret traversing. 88mm gun still operational. Another Tiger took a shell on the engine deck. Smoke poured from the rear. The crew might abandon it or keep fighting. A disabled Tiger with a working gun was still a fortress. 4 Tigers were still advancing, and they had adjusted course. They were moving toward Connor's position. The tank commanders had spotted the telephone wire. They had seen where the accurate American artillery fire was coming from. They knew someone was directing the guns, and they were coming to kill him. Connor checked the ditch. 18 inches of cover. Not enough to stop an 88mm shell. Not enough to stop machine gun fire. Not enough to stop anything a Tiger could throw at him. The Germans were 150 yards away now, close enough that Connor could see Balkan crews' markings on turrets, close enough to see tank commanders' faces. He lifted the handset one more time. Fire on my position. The fire direction officer repeated the coordinates back to him. Connor confirmed. The officer asked him to confirm again. Calling artillery fire on your own position violated every standard procedure. It meant friendly shells would land within yards of the observer. It meant the observer might die. Connor confirmed a 3rd time. 40 seconds later, the first shells landed 30 yards in front of his ditch. The concussion wave felt like being hit by truck. Air pressure changed. His lungs compressed. Vision blurred. Frozen dirt and shrapnel screamed overhead. The sound was beyond thunder, beyond anything human hearing was designed to process. He stayed in the ditch. He kept the handset pressed to his ear. Drop 20. Repeat fire. The next salvo landed 20 yards out, close enough that he could feel heat from the explosions, close enough that shrapnel tore through air 6 feet above his head. If he stood up, he would be shredded. If the shells landed 10 yards closer, the ditch wouldn't save him. The Tigers had stopped advancing. Tank commanders had buttoned up, closed hatches. Even Tiger crews didn't want to be outside their armor when American shells were detonating at point-blank range. But the German infantry was rallying, using the tanks for mobile cover, forming up for another push. Connor adjusted fire, walked shells back and forth across the German advance. Every time infantry tried to move forward, he dropped shells on them. Every time Tigers advanced, he called fire directly in front of them. One Tiger took direct hit on the turret. The shell didn't penetrate but damaged the turret ring. The turret wouldn't traverse anymore. The tank could only fire straight ahead, effectively useless. Another Tiger lost its second track. The crew abandoned it, 5 men scrambling out and running back toward German lines. American machine gun fire cut 2 down. 3 Tigers remained operational, and German infantry was getting closer. Connor could see individual faces now, 100 yards away, soldiers crawling through snow using shell craters for cover. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. Connor had been lying in the ditch for 40 minutes. His hands were numb. His feet were numb. Every time shell landed close, frozen dirt rained down on him, got in his eyes, in his mouth. The handset was slippery with ice, but he kept calling fire. A shell landed 15 yards to his right, then another 15 yards to his left. The Germans had him bracketed. Their artillery observers had pinpointed his position. They were trying to kill him with counter-battery fire. German shells and American shells were landing in the same 100-yard radius. The ditch had become the focal point of 2 artillery barrages. Soldiers in 3rd Battalion's foxholes could see what was happening. A lone lieutenant lying in a ditch ahead of the American line, calling artillery on his own position. German shells trying to kill him. American shells landing so close that fragments were hitting the edge of his ditch. And he wasn't moving, wasn't running. He was staying in place, adjusting fire, killing Germans. The German infantry pushed forward again, 80 yards away. Connor dropped the artillery another 10 yards. The shells landed between him and the advancing Germans, 60 yards from his position. The blast waves hammered him. Dirt cascaded into the ditch. Something hit his left shoulder. Shrapnel or rock, he couldn't tell. His shoulder went numb. He switched the handset to his right hand and kept calling coordinates. For 3 hours, Connor directed artillery fire from an 18-inch ditch. A private from battalion intelligence crawled out with spare wire and a backup handset. 40 minutes later, shrapnel tore open his leg, blood soaking the snow. Connor dragged him deeper into the ditch. The private refused evacuation and kept watch, bleeding but alert. When German soldiers closed to 10 yards, Connor dropped artillery 5 yards in front of himself. The blast lifted him off the ground, slammed him into frozen earth, and left him deaf in sudden silence, then ringing. The Germans were gone. By the time the attack stalled, all 6 Tiger tanks were destroyed or abandoned. German infantry fell back with massive losses, at least 150 dead. Connor kept firing, chasing them until the counterattack collapsed. After 3 hours, the guns fell silent. Wind moved through shattered trees. Wounded men cried out. Connor stood, stiff and shaking, and soldiers emerged to stare at the cratered ground, moonlike between lines. Confirmed German losses were 53 dead and 78 wounded left behind. Total casualties exceeded 150. 3rd Battalion lost 11 killed and 23 wounded, mostly before Connor arrived. After he began calling fire, American casualties stopped. Connor never sought praise, farming quietly, helping veterans, leaving medals untouched behind.